Hey there, it's Laria. In this video, I'll go over the 4 Resto Druid Legendaries that we can get in Shadowlands, and I want to offer a few thoughts about what I think might be good for early Mythic progression in Castle Nathria. I've been thinking about Legendaries a lot lately, and I know that Blizzard is still making changes to a lot of different things in beta, and so Legendaries are subject to change, but I'm a planner, and I'd like to know how I can prepare for Mythic progression at the start of a raid tier as early as possible. So this video is meant to open the conversation about Resto Druid Legendaries and what we all think might be good for early Mythic progression. I'll go over each of the 4 and I'll let you know what I think I'll be using, and hopefully that helps you prepare for when your guild is ready to do Mythic progression. Just keep in mind that these are just my opinions about the Legendaries. Nothing is set in stone yet. These opinions are just based on my experiences doing raid testing on beta and just my experiences in Mythic in the past. The first legendary I'll discuss is called Memory of the Mother Tree, and basically what this does is that each time you use Wild Growth, it has a 50% to make either your Rejuvenation or your Regrowth apply to 3 additional targets that are within 20 yards of the person you used Wild Growth on. I'm starting with this legendary because I have a strong feeling that this is the first legendary that I'm going to choose personally going into Mythic progression in Castle Nathria. One reason why I would choose this legendary is because early on in raid tiers, especially the first raid tier of a new expansion, our gear isn't the best, which means that our secondary stats are pretty low. And at the start of every raid tier, I really try to be aware of mana efficiency and how much mana I'm using and how much mana I need to use on the fight in order to keep everybody healthy. I know we haven't gone over the other 3 legendaries just yet, but this one I believe will help me the most when it comes to mana efficiency. The reason why is because by just using 1 Wild Growth, you have a 50% chance for your legendary to proc, and then spread HOTS to even more people. This legendary, right now in its current state, sounds insane to me. It's the one that I mostly use during raid testing. It's the one that I know the best. I don't really want to turn this into a numbers thing and go into the numbers from raid testing because Blizzard is still tuning all those fights, but just using logic from my experiences in Mythic raiding in the past, and also just knowing that going into a new expansion, our gear isn't going to be that great, it just makes sense that if you are focusing on mana efficiency and you choose a legendary that allows you to have more AoE healing, you would take this one. The second legendary I want to discuss is called Verdant Infusion. What this legendary does is when you use Swift Mend on a target, it no longer consumes any of the HOTS, but instead it actually extends the duration of all those HOTS by 6 seconds. So at one point during beta, this legendary actually extended your HOTS by 10 seconds. And then Blizzard changed it. So this legendary used to be really strong. There was some talk about using this and the talent Cenarian Ward, and you could basically extend Cenarian Ward. Now that Blizzard has reduced the HOTS duration from 10 seconds to 6 seconds, it's definitely not as strong as it was before, and comparing this one to the one we just went over, Memory of the Mother Tree, I feel like Memory offers more AoE healing, which is more important for early Mythic progression. I think Verdant Infusion could be good situationally, and it sounds like it could be a really strong legendary if you were really trying to focus on tank heals, but again, remember that we have early Mythic progression in mind. At that point, we can really only choose 1 legendary. We're not even sure how long it's going to take to craft each legendary, so knowing that you probably will only have 1 legendary at the start of Mythic progression, you want to make sure that you're making the right choice. If I knew I could only have 1 legendary and it was between Memory of the Mother Tree and Verdant Infusion, I would definitely choose Memory of the Mother Tree because I would have more AoE healing for a raid group versus Verdant Infusion, which really only focuses on 1 target and extending that 1 target's HOTS. The next legendary I want to go over is called the Dark Titan's Lesson. This is the legendary that I've been using whenever I do dungeons on beta. I'm not really someone who pushes keys, that's not really my area of expertise, so I'm really just going to compare this to a raid setting. The great thing that I love about this legendary is that you can use it with photosynthesis. The way that I would use this legendary is probably with photosynthesis, because I would keep 1 life bloom on the tank and 1 life bloom on myself so that my HOTS on everybody else will tick a little bit faster. However, I want to remind you again that it is at the start of a new raid tier, and our secondary stats are going to be low, including haste. So this legendary, in theory, sounds really great, especially if you use it with photosynthesis, but think about if you had really low haste. Your HOTS aren't going to have as many ticks. For Resto Druids, haste increases the amount of ticks that our HOTS do. So knowing that my haste is probably going to be low very early on in Mythic progression, I'm not going to choose this as my very first legendary. This is probably going to be the second legendary that I craft though. The bottom line for this legendary is that early on in Mythic progression, I really worry about mana efficiency, especially with not having great gear unless you've cleared Heroic a few times, you've killed a few Mythic bosses, and you've gotten some better gear. In order for this legendary to really work, since Life Bloom and using photosynthesis would make your hots tick faster, I just feel like there would be a lot of upkeep on trying to keep as many hots out as you can to actually get some use out of this legendary. But if you choose not to use photosynthesis and use Flourish instead, this legendary actually reduces the amount of healing that Life Bloom does by 10%. So I'm not really sure why you wouldn't use photosynthesis with this legendary. To me, it just seems like so much mana to have to keep hots out on everybody, and I wouldn't want to risk crafting this one as my first legendary, knowing that it'll take X amount of time before I can craft my second legendary and swap it out for something else. I would much rather play it safer and craft Memory of the Mother Tree as my first legendary. The last Resto Druid legendary that I want to go over is called Vision of Unending Growth. Whenever you use Rejuvenation, it has a 2.5% chance that that Rejuvenation will also apply to a nearby target. So if you have 5 or 6 Rejuvenations out, you have a 2.5% chance each time one of those Rejuvenations ticks to apply to somebody else. But here's the thing, I would not choose this as my first legendary for early Mythic progression. I know I'm probably repeating myself here, but again, keep in mind that during the beginning of a raid tier, our secondary stats are usually not that great. However, I do believe that eventually this legendary will get better, and it will have its own time to shine. This legendary actually reminded me a lot of the haste build that Resto Druids went with in Ny'alotha before the pre-patch. So during Ny'alotha, when we all had a ton of corruption, Resto Druids usually went with a haste build or a crit build. And the haste build was great because that meant that you could take the talent Abundance, and that means that with as much haste as we all had, as high as it was, that meant that it added ticks to all of our hots. But in the case of this legendary, knowing that it's adding additional rejuvenations to other players might not be that great really early on. I'm not writing off this legendary at all. I really do think that eventually it could have a place and it could get really strong, but in its current state, it is not my number one legendary for early Mythic progression. Now, in regards to boss fights in Castle Nathria, I want to explain why at the time of this video that I'm choosing Memory of the Mother Tree as my first legendary. If you go through the dungeon journal and take a look and see which fights look like they'll be movement heavy or healing intensive, it looks like AoE healing might be really good on those fights. I want to start with Shriekwing without going full-on guide and going over every single ability. I just want to explain why I think Memory of the Mother Tree would be good. This is a fight where it's really easy for players to take unnecessary damage or make a mistake and take a ton of damage. And because you are dodging sonars in phase 2 and you're moving from pillar to pillar, there is quite a bit of movement. Using this fight as an example of why I'm choosing Memory as my first legendary is because of the movement and the damage that goes out on this fight. If my legendary procs, that means that I can use a rejuve as I'm running from one pillar to the other or while I'm sidestepping a sonar, and that means that when my legendary procs, that rejuve is then going to apply to 3 other people within 20 yards. Another fight that I think Memory could do really well on is Artificer Zymox. This is the fight that spawns a whole bunch of adds that move at lightning speed, and you basically have to use these portals that you drop off in certain areas of the room. That tells you right there that there is more movement on this fight, and what can be really good about it is that if this legendary procs and you get off a rejuve or you throw out a regrowth and players enter this portal and move to the opposite side of the room, those hots are still going to be ticking on them. That's why I said AoE healing can be really good early on in Mythic progression. The way legendaries are designed in Shadowlands versus how they were designed in Legion is very different, and I think in a good way. But at the same time, I feel anxious about not knowing what to pick. This is the reason why I wanted to make this video. It might be a little bit early seeing as how we're still in beta and the expansion was also delayed, but I wanted to get this out there and, like I said, open up the conversation so that other people who like to plan as much as I do can get a little bit of information and what I'm thinking for when my guild starts Mythic progression in Castle Nathria. This video isn't meant to be the final answer. I could also be completely wrong, and in another month or 2 or whenever Shadowlands comes out, a bunch of you might come back and you might be like, Laria, why are you crafting Memory first? That legendary's terrible. Who knows? Blizzard will definitely continue to make changes. I'm not sure if they'll touch Resto Druid Legendaries, but these are the ones that we're working with right now, and this is what we have, and I'm curious what you think. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are about the legendaries, what you think you'll choose, whether it's for Mythic raiding, Mythic Plus, or other kinds of content.
You just come running by.